Sonic, gotta go fast. Sonic, gotta go fast. Faster, 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 faster. Sonic is one of the fastest things alive. Sonic has been around since the early 90s and was only made so Sega could compete against Nintendo on the console war. Sega had the Sega Genesis that came out 2 years prior, while Nintendo just launched the Super Nintendo in the US. And boy, was it the fight of the century. You got Sega and Nintendo, it was the console wars. And it was because of Sonic that the console wars begun. Sonic 1 is actually pretty challenging. It's not one of my favorite of the classic Sonic games, but I really found it enjoyable when it comes to how difficult it was compared to the other one. Not everything was added into the Sonic game, such as Spin Dash, but it still established what the Sonic gameplay mechanic was going to be about. You have Sonic going through different zones, each of them have 3 different acts. The final act is just you fighting against Dr. Eggman at the end, rinse and repeat. That's Sonic. And that's what's enjoyable about most of these classic Sonic games. Since the first game was massively popular, obviously they decided to launch it with the sequel, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which establishes Sonic's sidekick, Tails, or Miles Tails Prouder. Basically the same game, but better. This time, you have a sidekick, and you still battle against Dr. Eggman. But what makes this one is how memorable it was. This is the one where they established the spin dash technique. Obviously, you fought against Dr. Eggman, but the new feature they added that was rarely touched upon in the first game was the Chaos Emeralds. See, in the first Sonic game, you have these special zones, which are like these trippy, psychedelic areas with the fish and doves flying in the background. In Sonic 2, they actually upgraded it a lot better with the special zones, where it's more three-dimensional. Such innovative technological experiences going on around this time. But completing these special zones allowed you to get a Chaos Emerald. And if you get all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you become Super Sonic, which is heavily inspired by the anime Dragon Ball Z. Makes you OP if you hold on to a certain amount of rings, but your rings drain every time you use it. Because of the massive popularity of Sonic 2, of course they're going to make more Sonic games after this. I mean, come on, you think they're just going to make 2 Sonic games? Nah, the third one was Sonic CD. Yeah, you thought it was going to be Sonic 3, but I'll get to that. See, Sonic CD was made because it was basically the same developers who made the first Sonic games in Japan. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was made in America, but because they were making Sonic 3, Japan was just making Sonic CD, which kind of makes you feel like it's very similar to the first Sonic game. Tails is not in it, some of the versatile levels are very similar. Spin Dash was basically added as a last-minute thing. It introduces the coolest side villain since Eggman, and that is Metal Sonic. Just look at this early 90s Japanese commercial Sonic CD. Sega Power. Amy Rose was also introduced, which I fucking don't give a shit. She was just the damsel in distress that Sonic had to go rescue from Metal Sonic. And then in the end, you fight Dr. Eggman at all the levels, yada yada yada. But what's cool is that you can go back in time in Sonic CD. There is a feature if you go through these past and future signs, you basically boost a lot of speed and then you end up going through time and space and ended up going to a past version of that zone or a future version or a present version. But I felt like that was a really cool feature that Sega decided to add it, which was never touched on with the other Sonic games afterwards. In 1994, we finally got the Sonic game that feels like the ultimate Sonic game, and that is Sonic the Hedgehog 3, or Sonic Knuckles, or Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. See, what's crazy is that Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles was one game at one point. But due to the development being rushed, Sega decided to release Sonic 3 as one half of a massive game, and then Sonic and Knuckles will be the second half. Because in total, you will have at least over 12 different zones if you combine those games together, which is insane for a Sonic game. That's why I feel like it's just so amazing. You have so many different cool stylistic zones, it's still the same gameplay, new additional features added like Knuckles, the Echidna, was the newly additional character who seemed like a villain at first but ends up being a good guy in the end. And in Sonic and Knuckles, you can play as Knuckles. And in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, you could play as Knuckles. But then if you attach Sonic and Knuckles to Sonic 2, you could play as Knuckles in that game. So there's a lot of features you can add with Knuckles in the Sonic series. Even though Michael Jackson helped made some of the songs in Sonic 3, they didn't give him name credit because he was dealing with some, I could say, allegations at the time. I'm not touching about it. But Michael Jackson's music, you could definitely hear some of it in the original soundtrack of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Just listen to it. Yeah, doesn't that sound like Michael? I believe so. Sega had to reorchestrate the Sonic the Hedgehog 3 music that Michael Jackson worked on and basically made this shitty-ass version of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 music that no one gives a shit about. Even with that minor complaint, the original Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles is by far one of the greatest in the original classic Sonic the Hedgehog series. The amount of levels, the idea that you could play as 3 different Sonic characters, the save feature, you still get Super Sonic. It's just a lot of game in 2 different cartridges that you have to attach to each other. But Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, damn, felt like a way to culminate the entire classic Sonic the Hedgehog quadrilogy, because I'm including Sonic the Hedgehog CD. After the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, Sega released the Sega Saturn, which was a flop. It was such a flop that a Sonic game was not even in it. Well, originally, Sonic Extreme was going to be the next Sonic game, but was canceled because of development problems once again. Knuckles had a game on the Sega 32X, but not a lot of people talk about it. There was a bunch of other side mini Sonic games as well. 2 Saturday morning Sonic cartoons. One of them is goofy as fuck, and one of them is actually a serious take on Saturday morning cartoons that actually has a well-established narrative story. Without Sonic, we wouldn't have gotten the legendary Chris Chan. There was a little fanboy who entered a contest.
All I had to do was exactly watch Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, and I'd listen to what Sonic says at the end of it, and write it down for a whole week, and then I had to mail it in, and I had to be drawn out of a hat, and I just won.
I highly recommend watching a Chris Chan video. It is just beautiful. Just watch the documentary online. It's amazing.
Thank you for checking out my video. Be sure to check out more content in the future.